So what I'll do is I will create a new XSD file. In the resource file, I'm gonna create a new XML schema file that the OSB service will use. So I'm gonna select a new XML schema file. So I call this as invoice XSD, and you specify where you want to store it. So we'll store the XML XSD file in the resources directory. So select that and say OK. So here you can basically uh, design your XSD. Actually, you can so this is the example element. You can basically insert element. You can basically design your XML schema here. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use an existing XSD that I have already used. I have already created actually, so I can. I'm just gonna copy and paste the source code. Uh, so here, basically, what this is how my invoice request rule looks like. It will accept invoice ID, like a list of emails and the actual content of the invoice, and the response will have like a status and a message like to indicate to the consumer that whether the invoice was received or whether there was any error. Um, so they're pretty simple XML schema XSD. So before you create a WSDL for the pipeline, you need to have the schema defined for your OSB service, for your proxy service. So now you can basically you can basically take the pipeline and do a drag and drop of the pipeline. Just name your pipeline as, in this case, I'm naming this pipeline as invoice pipeline. So for your project, you can name a name that is appropriate for your project. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new WSDL file. So I'm going to say create a WSDL file. So as I mentioned, it is a request response. So select the services of, like, it's not one way, it's like a request response. So one way is if you will select one way where consumer application is not expecting any kind of response, where a synchronous request reply where consumer is basically waiting for some kind of response if it needs some like details about a customer or an order. You can use this synchronous request response. So in this case, I just want to send an acknowledgement back that I have received the invoice. So operation name, you can name the operation name however you want. So in this case, I'll just say process the invoice, and those of you who are familiar with WSDL, you can give this name. You can leave the default as it is, or you can just uh, say like name, invoice, port type, and all other namespaces, the namespace that you want to have. So in this case, I'll just leave the default that it has given. And here the input, output, and the fault message, you got to select the schema. In the fault, in case of any error, how your fault schema should look like. So for this tutorial, I'll just I'll just have the input and output filled in. So I'll just call it the invoice in, and so you can select, these are the basic types you can select, but in this case, I have the schema already there defined. So in this, I have created this invoice XML schema. So this is what I'm selecting. So I'm gonna select the request. So the input will row it is of the type invoice request. So I say OK and say OK, and then select for the output, the response. I'm gonna select the So I go to the applications, and in the resource I select the invoice RSP response, say OK, and so this will generate your WSDL for the pipeline, and it is asking you if you want to expose this as a proxy service. So here you can name the proxy service how you want to be. So you don't need to have this pipeline here. So say finish. So what it will do when you create this, it will create a proxy service on the left side. So here you can connect your pipeline to the business service. So here you have uh, on the left hand side you have a proxy service which will receive requests from your service consumers, and this pipeline will basically will process your request message and response messages, and the pipeline will call the invoice. It will call the external. It will call the business service. So you click on this invoice uh, pipeline. You have this routing component already filled in. So what's happening is that when you connect the pipeline to the business service, it has created a routing component. So this routing is the one that tells you that it is calling this service. So if you click on that, it shows that it is calling this service. So you basically have to select an operation that you're going to call. So in this case, uh, so you make sure that you select the operation. So in the JCA file, you'll see there is a JCA file where it tells you the the package, the procedure name, all that stuff. So in the routing, make sure that you select an operation, otherwise it will give an error. So here, before this business service is called, and there is a request action, so you can have some kind of you got to do transformation here, and there is you got to do a response transformation, so that your basically it is of a format that is exposed as a WSDL here in for this service. So there is a pipeline pair that you can create. So I'm going to drag and drop the pipeline pair. So this is a pipeline pair actually. There is a request pipeline, there is a response pipeline. So request pipeline can have a set of stages. So you can have all the operations, related operations, contained in the stage. So what I will do is I'll just do some logging in this, or you can do a variety of things like validation. So there's a validation. You can do logging. You can do a lot of operations that you can do. If you want to do any enrichment, if you want to call some Java program, you can do that. There's like assign statement. You can do it. A lot of activities you can do. So for this one, I'll just do some logging. So and this logging and this I can have a proper login. So for a debug, I can keep it as a debug. So for the program, and then what I will log is basically I can give an expression. In this case, I'll just select what I want to log. So here, so I want to log this. Uh, I want to log this body, the whole body that I get as part of the request. So I just did a logging in the response. Let's say I wanna when it is running in a debug mode, I want to log. So I'm gonna log the response body. So I go to here and select the response. Okay. Response body. Here you have like a request response pipeline with some kind of operation. So here the main thing is that you got to do a transformation. So you can do transformation just before entering the route node. That is where the business service is called, or you can do it in this routing component also. So what I'll do is, to do a transformation, I got to use this replace. So this replace will replace the message, the incoming message with the content. So I'm basically with the content that can be understood by the business service. So what I'll do is I'll select replace node contents, and here when I click the expression, I can do transformation using XSLT, Xquery, or so you can select the option that you want to use. So in this case, I want to use the XSLT resource. So and then I'm gonna say I have to select body here, and I will select XML query resource. So you got to select your XML query Xquery file, but I don't have any file right now created. So what I'll do is I will create a new file. So before this, I'll just save the project, and I'll go to the resource directory and create a new Xquery file. So here I have created a new Xquery file. Call this like invoice. Uh, so here I got to define what is the source of the. So I add the source. So I can select. Uh, so I will select the source in the application. My source is the invoice that I have selected. So invoice request is my source. I will select the invoice request and say click. And I got to select the target. So call this as like invoice. So I gave this the input XML, like just gave us like Xquery input. Uh, so the parameter, and then I got to select the target for this transformation. So I got to select. So what I'll do is here you got to select, because it's gonna call this the PL SQL. It's gonna call the PL SQL. So we got to select the PL SQL API input. So input parameters. So I will select the input parameters of the PL SQL and say OK. So when you say OK, it will generate the XML query, the Xquery Xquery mapping. So here you got to do proper mapping. Uh, so so if they are not showing, you got to right click and do insert to make it available on the Xquery editor, transformation editor. So here you're gonna map the incoming XML with the XML, the business service XML. So I map it. I do a mapping of the invoice ID, version number, and there's a list of emails that are associated with this. So the PDF content, I'm gonna map the PDF content. So I map the PDF content, and then the list. So first I got to connect the list, and then So here you have the sequence. So here there is a source code for it has generated the source code. So there is a list here, and email, it's a list. So for all other, it has done for all other elements, it has done one-to-one mapping. But for the email list, it has created a for loop actually. Uh, so here there is uh, you got to add a text here. Um, so when you're using a list, you got to make sure that you don't use the function data, the Xquery function data. You just use uh, the email item. Make sure that you add this, the text function, so that for each item in a list, it will return the exact the item value actually. So this is a modification that you got to do when you're using Xquery. So here you have your Xquery ready. So what I'll do is I'll go to and I'll select the Xquery that I have just created. So Xquery resource. So this is Xquery that I have created for the transforming the input message. So here you got to do so here you got to mention the incoming body content that will be like transformed. So remember we have given like uh, input parameter as the parameter name as the inv underscore xq underscore in. So we got to uh, assign this with the body content here. So that's the transformation on the incoming message. On the response message, you'll do the same. So what I'll do is I will make sure that you save your projects time periodically. And if there is any error, you'll see like a red symbol here, red indicating that there are some errors. So fix those errors. So what I'll do is I will create another Xquery file to do the transformation of the response message. So select new here, and then you select the Xquery here. So say that you're transforming the invoice. I just say out because it's a query to uh, it's a Xquery for transforming your output message. So see, in the same way, I'm gonna select my source. And the source is basically the output that I'm getting from the PL SQL API, the store procedure. So here I will, in the resources, I will select the output parameters, say OK, and so I just call this as inv underscore out dot xquery output. And then I select the target, so the target schema XSD that. So there is XSD for the proxy service. So I select invoice response. So now I get the mapper for transforming the response message. So again, if the XML schema are not available in the click insert. If it is not available in the mapper, you just have to select insert to make your schema elements available for the mapper. So here I'm going to map the status code. If there is an error, I can, any message that your procedure is sending, I'm going to map it to the message actually. So with this, it creates your, with this mapping, it creates your Xquery source. So as in you do the mapping, it will create the source actually. So you can save this and come back to the pipeline. So here again, I'm going to select the replace. So replace is basically is used for the transformation, as I mentioned earlier. So select what you want to do transfer of the body and click like select the replace node contents, and here you have the options how you want to do the transformation. So in this case, as we have already created Xquery, so I'm going to select the Xquery uh, Xquery file for doing the transfer. So I'm going to select the invoice output. So here I have, so here what you want to do the, so select body slash star. So this will be your input for your Xquery program, the program, the XQI file here. So with this, basically you have, your pipeline is ready. So this is a pretty basic pipeline. There are a lot of things we can do, a lot of other things we can do, like error handling, there, how do you do error handling? So uh, there is a OSB, this JDeveloper gives you a mechanism to do the error handling. So there is error handler here. You can like do a drag and drop, and in this error handling, all the steps that you want to do, like calling another program or to do logging. So set of steps can be done actually. So in this tutorial, I just wanted to show you the basic. How do you create a basic service that performs basic ESB functions like transformations here, and call a business service. So your service is pretty much ready. So one thing, additional thing I'm going to do is, I have exposed this service as a SOAP service. So I want to expose this as a uh, as a REST service. So what I'll do is, I can expose this as a REST. So I right click and say REST, expose as REST. So I'm gonna call this as invoice RS. So to indicate that it's a REST service. Uh, so here it's basically a post message. Uh, so I click here and I select it's a post. You are sending an invoice object to this service. So I'm going to call this as a post, and the payload is basically JSON. I select JSON here, and if you want to see how your request will look like, so it will generate a sample payload. So click on this generate sample payload. So it will, this is XML payload, but this is a JSON payload. This is how it will look like. You have a binary, you have a invoice ID. So this is how uh, your the input payload will look like. Say click OK. It will store it in the resource file. Same thing for the response. Select the payload as JSON, and to see how the payload will look like, click JSON. So it will show how the message looks like. Say OK, and so here you have uh, created JSON request response payload, and say OK, and it will create a invoice RS proxy service. So when you click OK. So basically this, you can deploy this service to your OSB environment. So you just do a save all, and you can basically do a deploy. To do a deploy, you got to create a new deployment profile with the with like a service bus configuration. You got to do all that. But for simplicity, what I'll do is, you know, I will basically export this project as a jar file. So I'll do an export. So service bus resource. So I say okay, and I'm gonna export is in the configuration jar file, not on a server. So select, and so basically where you want to. So I go to the console. So here I can basically deploy the deploy my service. To deploy the service, I got to say create a session, and click basically import config file. So select the jar file that I have just created. So this is the jar file that I've created. Say click next, and say import. Okay, so basically I got a error here, uh, some error. So I got to correct that. So if while deploying, if you get an error, so it will show an error. So this error is mainly because maybe the database, the uh, the JNDI name is not defined on the WebLogic console. So you got to make sure you go to the WebLogic console and define that the JNDI connection. So so that has to be done. So I'm gonna correct that. I'm gonna and I'll redeploy the service.